Hello, friends. We are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. Here at Forbidden Knowledge News, I've always taken an unbiased, open-minded, and responsible approach to presenting my own theories, and the views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. Conspiracies are definitely fun to discuss in a responsible way. My suggestion to everyone that has an audience and presents theories and possibilities should present them as such, and in no way present unsubstantiated information as truth. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Cory Hughes. First, a couple of announcements. Check out our affiliate, Brainsupreme. Brainsupreme contains the highest quality ingredients to start your microdosing journey. Right now, until November 1st, you get 25% off your order when you use code FKN25 at checkout or use the link right in the description. When you use that link, you're going to get 25% off the entire order so you can start your microdosing journey today. Also, watch the Forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana. That's on Tubi, Roku channel, and multiple streaming platforms. It's a great way to help us produce this upcoming film. Also, get a Rokfin premium membership at rokfin.com/FKN+. Get access to our premium content. And finally, always download our audio podcast through Spreaker. That is always free for you. Today I want to welcome back to the show Cory Hughes. He is author of A Warning from History, host of Bloody History, and co-host of Day Zero. Cory, welcome back. How you doing?
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Of course, man. It's been a while. It's time for some updates. You've got some exciting projects in the works that we're going to be discussing, a little updates about the JFK research you've been doing, and you also have a Substack that's becoming pretty popular. We're going to talk about that as well. But before we do, for those that may not be familiar, just remind us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Sure. My name is Cory Hughes, and I'm a Kennedy assassination researcher. My book, A Warning from History, is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and a bunch of other places, too. So, fundamentally, the Kennedy assassination is, in my opinion, the most important event in American history. It changed the absolute direction of our country and has led to the events that we're currently living through today. And so I highly advise, if people are interested in the actual mechanics of how the assassination took place, the nitty-gritty fine details, you most certainly want to pick up my book, A Warning from History. And speaking of which, I actually have in hand signed softcover versions available. If anyone's interested, they can get a hold of me directly at Cory@coryhughes.org to obtain those signed copies.
Right on. Yeah, also, if you shoot me an email, same thing. We'll get you one of those signed copies as well.
You know, it's amazing. Time goes rather quickly because the book came out exactly a year ago.
Oh, shit. Wow.
So, yeah, a year and a week or so, something like that. And my goal really for the first year was about 1,000 copies. And I think I'm sitting just over 900, maybe 910 or 920, something. So I mean, I came pretty close to fulfilling, my initial goal. But I think that this is one of those things that, though, the longer it's out, the more people will be aware of it. And I think it'll end up doing very well over the years to come, because really there's no other place to get the information that I've dug up. It is the culmination of 5 years of work on Kennedy specifically, into things that the longer I did my research, the more I realized that there was so much out there that people hadn't been able to connect the dots on, but that we are drowning in dots, right? And that's kind of the problem with Kennedy research in general, is that people have dug up so many dots and so many, what I call dots, that need to be connected. But people have dug up so much information, and that some of it is contradictory to other information. And then you end up losing a kind of central point of reference onto base reality, right? And so people have a hard time discerning what are authoritative sources of information really, and where can you actually find true things that happened that aren't just completely plastered with people's agendas or preconceived notions. Like, the worst of them all is that Kennedy was killed by the CIA and the government because he was going to pull out of Vietnam. And so when you dig into that aspect of the story, and why that's what almost everybody believes, right? When you dig into that, you'll find that Kennedy and McNamara, as Secretary of Defense, had spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $6.5 billion on helicopters and airplanes within 12 months of the assassination. Now, I don't know about you, but if you know anything about politics, politicians don't go out and spend that kind of money, which in today's money, that's close to $60 billion. You're not spending that kind of money if you're not fully committed, period. That's American taxpayer money. And to me, that is the biggest indicator that they had no plan on pulling out of Vietnam. Then I was going through the ZR rifle files, which are the assassination files. Basically, the government had concluded that in investigating the CIA, there were 4 assassination attempts that were directly connected to what they deemed to be CIA authorized assassinations, right? Now, the reality is there's way more than that, but the government had 4. And even in this document, which was done by the CIA's Inspector General, which the CIA's Inspector General, when you really start to dig into some of the work the Inspector Generals have done, they have actually kind of held the CIA to account on a lot of things. So even though it's CIA within the CIA organization, they've actually done a pretty good job of, making sure that certain practices come to an end. So in this report, in talking about Vietnam and DM in particular, who was in charge of South Vietnam at the time, they realized that Kennedy's memo, where he's talking about reallocating troops in Vietnam, was merely to put pressure on him. And it failed, obviously. And so to me, there's more than enough evidence to indicate Kennedy's assassination had absolutely nothing to do with his stance on Vietnam, had even less to do with this work on the Federal Reserve that is talked about surrounding Kennedy. And ultimately, the assassination happened because he was going to end all aid to Israel and over their nuclear program, right? They didn't have any kind of international right to have a nuclear program. They hadn't signed any treaties. And therefore, Kennedy was going to bring that to light on a much bigger scale than it had already been. And so that's ultimately why Kennedy was killed. And all roads will lead to Rome, so to speak, when you really get into particularly the documents and the relationships behind the assassination.
Right on. You've gotten a lot of shit for the information you've put out, mainly from longtime JFK researchers who have pretty much regurgitated the same information. And now, after your book comes out, after time passes, I hear some of these same people talking about the concepts that you brought up in your book, especially the nuclear connection and the Israel connection. That's coming out more and more. And it's funny how these ideas are now kind of percolating through the consciousness after you put it out and got so much shit for actually trying to originally discuss this stuff.
Right. And so to me, people are talking about this and they're correct, but they're not really talking about the underlying relationships that to me prove the case. And to me, that goes back to like the end of World War II and the relationships that are kind of born out of the war between American intelligence, right? The pre-Israeli Zionists, as I call them, the men who were behind the founding of Israel, but they didn't have an Israel yet, right? And then the United States Mafia. And all of these organizations are one organization between the years of 1945, 46-ish, which is kind of the inception, all the way through the assassination, right? So you have nearly 17 years, something like that, 18 years of relationship building between this international entity and American mobsters, because the American mobsters, everyone likes to look to the Godfather and say that the American mob was run by these Italians. But really, that's not the case. That was the case at the local level, right? The local streets were run by the Italians, but the overall large-scale governance of the mafia was really all managed by Jewish Americans, who all had immigrated to this country, or parents had immigrated to this country. Prime examples are guys like Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky was a Polish Jew, came to America as a child, and most people don't realize this, but he was the man behind the creation of the commission in New York, which was the five families, right? 5 Italian families. I think there was one exception on the families that wasn't Italian, but overall they gave the Italians the appearance of being in charge because they were in charge of their kind of local communities. But really, the large-scale governance was handled by Meyer Lansky and his team, who acted as kind of middlemen to the mob bosses, right? And so you didn't really have any sovereignty. Guys like Giancana and the guys connected to the assassination, guys like Santos Travacante, Carlos Marcello, right? All of these guys were directly connected and in one way or another obedient to Meyer Lansky, who basically set up the large-scale international drug trafficking routes and formed the relationships with mobsters around the world, right? Because it seems as though the common thread is that Jews are seemingly all over the place. And so they don't seem to have a problem in coordinating their activities together. That seems to open up every door for them. So ever since Kennedy, it appears as though our country's been kind of like on a downhill spiral. And it seems to be intentional. All the things that we could have done to avoid this catastrophe, we intentionally did the opposite, right, over the years. And I think a big part of that was under Nixon going off the gold standard. Obviously, that wasn't his idea. That was forced upon him by economic handlers. And that opened the floodgates to massive corruption in our country, and ultimately created the economic gap between the rich and the poor, right? Because now 80% of the country lives paycheck to paycheck, right? This was all intentional. And going off of the gold standard, I don't think would have been possible if the preceding decade hadn't occurred and Kennedy had lived. I think we'd have a very different present today if Kennedy was not killed. I think you can. And I think when you look at our foreign policy and our attitudes towards Israel and the Middle East, I can definitely tell you that none of this would be happening today if Kennedy had lived. Because he would have ultimately cut all aid to Israel, and then none of this would have happened. They would have been basically invaded by the surrounding countries decades ago, and there wouldn't be an Israel today.
Right on. Now, you've done a lot of research into the actual mechanics of the assassination. This is one of the most interesting parts. And I look at movies like John Wick, and it's more like that than you would imagine, in a sense that there are so many people involved at the ground level that may not exactly know what's happening, but they still have a purpose to serve in the overall operation.
Yeah, that's extremely important to understand. And you have to understand that I've said this before, conspiracies aren't a bunch of guys sitting around a smoky room, coming up with sinister plots. Conspiracies are about taking orders because these are all organized organizations, right? CIA, FBI, Mafia, there's chains of command, right? And so really enacting conspiracy is just about taking orders. And so you'll have guys who were couriers, guys like Jim Braden. One example, Jim Braden, otherwise known as Eugene Hale Brading. He is a guy who was a courier for Meyer Lansky. He is arrested as he is coming out of the Daltex building on November 22nd. Now, some people like to think that that's just coincidence, but that's ridiculous, right? Now, was Jim Braden some mafia mastermind who was clearly in on the assassination? Was he a shooter? And absolutely not, right? This guy is a low-level courier, which means he delivers messages and packages, right? And he did that for Meyer Lansky. But he's just the guy who takes orders. A mid-level guy who takes orders. And that's what conspiracies are about, people taking orders. And the vast majority of the actions that lead to something like Kennedy getting killed involve people who are genuinely not in on the large-scale plot, right? Like, you had a lot of people involved in the assassination who were there to facilitate certain actions, right? Like, Oswald is alleged to have gone to Mexico City, but he never went to Mexico City. It was Kerry Thornley who went to Mexico City acting as Oswald, right? But along the way, there were people who Kerry Thornley met with who were obvious handlers, right? John Howard Bowen, a guy allegedly on the bus, the same bus that Lee Harvey Oswald was allegedly on to take to Mexico City. This guy happens to have another name of Albert Osborne, right? So this guy has multiple names. He's bouncing back and forth between different places in the United States and Mexico City. He's clearly involved in some sort of intelligence operations. He's definitely involved with the fake churches that are pretty much used to raise and launder money. And he just so happens to be involved in the Kennedy assassination story by being allegedly on the same bus that Oswald took, but Oswald never went to Mexico City, right? So you have these people who are involved along the way, probably not involved in an assassination plot, but they are there to serve a function, a singular function, right? And that's what they do. And that's why the vast majority of people who were involved in the Kennedy assassination don't know anything, really. And so it takes a long time to kind of differentiate who's who and what's what. And the funny thing is, guys like, Albert Osborne or John Howard Bowen, whatever his real name is, and guys like Fred Lee Chrisman, who was another one of these guys who was clearly a handler who facilitated certain actions of people. Fred Lee Chrisman is the first phone call that Clay Shaw made after he was arrested. Once he realizes that he's arrested for his involvement allegedly in the Kennedy assassination, he calls Fred Lee Chrisman. And Fred Lee Chrisman at this point is up in Washington State. And Chrisman is basically working out of an office with Thomas Beckham, another guy involved in the assassination. After the assassination, Beckham hooks up with him, and they proceed to operate a mill of generating fake businesses, business fronts, fake religious certificates, fake college certificates, right? And when you look at their operation in and of itself, it's like, what the hell are these guys doing here, right? But obviously, they were facilitating covers for other agents. That's what they had to do. They organized something around 200 corporations in Washington State, all ran out of just a handful of addresses. Now, why would you do that? You do that because you're providing covers for other people, right? So you're a definite link in a chain. And so you come across a lot of these people who are just links in a chain. And then when you find the people who were simultaneously in the know in certain activities down in New Orleans, but then they happen to make appearances in Dallas on November 22nd, then you can kind of start to eliminate the riffraff from who was involved in the actual plotting. You know what I mean?
I wonder if
when you find
there's
people,
one main script writer for the whole event that has it all planned out and just disperses accordingly to different people on a need-to-know basis, or if it's something I don't even understand.
So when I look at that, when I tried to figure that out, and to me, in as far as actual logistics goes, I think you have a couple people involved. Okay. So putting aside the actual where the shooters were and like the planning that went into deciding on where shooters would be, putting that aside, I think in as far as large scale operations go, you got a guy working for the CIA who spent the summer of '63 in New Orleans when he's normally should have been in Miami, working at the JM Wave station, which was the largest CIA domestic station. And you're talking about a guy named George Joannides, and he was the head of psychological operations for JM Wave Station. The JM Wave Station was led by Ted Shackley, who I believe was in Dealey Plaza that day. George Joannides was clearly in Dealey Plaza that day. And also you have David Morales, who is another guy stationed at JM Wave in Miami in Dealey Plaza that day, right? But George Joannides was the only person that I can trace who literally knew firsthand all of the players and then some. He knew people who were higher up in the CIA hierarchy, guys like Martin McAuliffe, right, who would have been a handler of Kerry Thornley. Clearly would have been known to George Joannides. George Joannides, if you ask me, he was probably the guy who made sure certain connections happened, that certain people got connected in certain areas, certain of the Cubans, because they started to set Oswald up down in Miami back in March of '63, at a time when he was in New Orleans. There's no evidence Oswald ever made it down to Miami. But we have numerous stories of Oswald making appearances on behalf of, number one, Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which, according to the official story, he didn't even make those connections until May of '63. So we got him in March of '63, allegedly involved in Fair Play for Cuba activities in Miami, witnessed in Miami, at a time when provably William Seymour, one of the two men impersonating Oswald, was living down in Miami, right? So I feel like they started to set Oswald up in different places and then abandoned those plots, right? Because it didn't really make a lot of sense for him to have been doing anything in Miami, especially when the official story says one thing and his involvement down there would have contradicted the official story stuff, right? So so I don't know how we got on that.
That's all
subject,
right. Well, you mentioned Oswald, and you not only go into these branches of lesser-known characters into great detail, but you've discovered some very interesting things about Oswald, and possibly he never even worked at the book depository. There were multiple Oswalds. Very interesting stuff.
So when you start to study Oswald, you really come across a whirlwind of contradictory information, which, going back to the time when he was a child, like 7 or 8 years old, starting around 1947, between 1947 and 1959, when Oswald leaves for the Soviet Union, which is about 12 years, you have an absolute onslaught of information that pretty much shows that there were two children living under the name Lee Harvey Oswald, mostly in the same towns, but there's a lot of contradictory information. John Armstrong uncovered most of this in his book Harvey and Lee, where he pretty much he found evidence supporting the notion that there were actually two children being raised under the name Lee Harvey Oswald by two different mothers, both with the name Marguerite Oswald. And this goes back specifically to '47, the inception of the CIA. The stuff they tell us about Oswald's father, allegedly Robert Lee Oswald, died in '39 before Oswald was born. I don't believe that for a split second. There's too many missing pieces of the puzzle that could only be resolved if Oswald's father was actually somebody else and working in intelligence, right? So, because there was no CIA in '39, right? Like there was no CIA until '47. And so you have this gap between when Oswald's father, who I think would have been the one to bring him into this intelligence world, because when you look into Oswald's mother, Marguerite Oswald, you find that she's just kind of like a normal kind of 1930s, 40s woman, not a intelligence asset in any way, shape, or form. But somehow the family was connected to intelligence if they're going to be utilizing a child in an intelligence operation. And people were like, well, why would you have two children named Lee Harvey Oswald? Why would the CIA do this? Well, what would the CIA be willing to do at the height of the Cold War to get a spy into the Soviet Union? They do just about anything. They do plastic surgery on people to make them look like somebody else. They would do all kinds of stuff. So the idea to me of them raising two children under the same name with the idea of exfiltrating one of them into the Soviet Union, and then he could basically just disappear, because then they'd have the original, when the Soviets go looking for him, say, hey, where's Lee Harvey Oswald? They'd be like, oh, we have Lee Harvey Oswald here in America, right? So they wouldn't even think that there'd be a duplicate on the loose in the Soviet Union. That's kind of my idea of what they were doing. And this all connects to a number of programs that were provably in place between 55 and 59, starting with Redskin. So back in 55, there was a number of programs, but Redskin was the large-scale program which tried to utilize a number of various naturalized American citizens to get them into the Soviet Union. Ultimately, this program would be reorganized under another program called AE Balcony. And AE Balcony would be like the umbrella program governing all the other Soviet operations trying to get spies into the Soviet Union. Well, Oswald ends up going to, and AE Balcony ran from 59 to 62, the same exact years that Oswald's in the Soviet Union. But to me, there was more specific information that links him to the AE Balcony program, and that's Oswald ends up leaving the Soviet Union with Marina Oswald, right? They get married in the Soviet Union. They have a child there. And ultimately, Oswald will go to the American embassy and he will receive money from them. He'll receive a travel visa and he'll receive a new passport. And he did all this on June 1st of 1962. The AE Balcony program and all subsequent Russian operations were terminated on June 1st of 1962. So to me, it's not, I mean, that's just beyond any kind of coincidence. The idea that they would terminate Russian operations and the same day they would issue him his passport and all that stuff back is kind of, it's not coincidence. He was clearly part of this AE Balcony program. Then when you start to look into Marina Oswald, and a very big thank you to my friend Jim. Jim uncovered that Marina Oswald, before she ends up leaving the Soviet Union with Lee Oswald, she was actually hooked up with a guy named Robert Webster, who was actually another false defector, another CIA false defector to the Soviet Union. But that didn't work out with him, and so she ended up getting with Lee Oswald and coming back to America. So to me, the idea that intelligence doesn't have its hands in all of this is beyond ridiculous.
I just heard someone the other day talking about how Oswald worked in the book depository, and you have discovered information that may be quite contradicting to that.
Well, so far, and I have to admit this, I'm the only person on planet Earth who doesn't buy the idea that Oswald was present at the book depository on November 22nd. There's a whole slew of reasons for that. Number one, the story of Buell Frazier giving him a ride to work that day completely falls apart. Not only are the descriptions that he gives of Oswald's clothing that morning completely inconsistent with the official story. He describes Oswald as having a gray, more or less flannel wool type jacket, when we all know Oswald didn't wear a jacket to work that day. He wore a dark brown button-up shirt that was unbuttoned and a white T-shirt underneath it. That's clearly what Oswald was wearing when he's arrested. But no one mentions that description of him all day long. As he's seen throughout the building that day, he's described as having worn a light brown jacket and basically a polo shirt. This is kind of confirmed by the photographs of a man in the railroad yards who you see in the Robert Hughes film, whom I've identified as William Seymour. But after Oswald gets to work, all the interactions with him that day can basically easily be explained by the presence of another man, William Seymour, whom I've captured in the photographs in the Robert Hughes film back in the railroad yards. And so then you start to get into incidents where Oswald was allegedly stopped inside the building in the book depository on the second floor, where he was allegedly drinking a Coke 90 seconds after the president was shot, and he was confronted by Officer Marion Baker and Roy Truly, who was one of the managers in the book depository. Very famous story depicted in Oliver Stone's JFK film. But that's it's a blatant fiction. It never happened. That story never happened. The idea that Oswald was stopped 90 seconds after the assassination drinking a Coke in the lunchroom is a blatant fiction that was constructed for numerous reasons. The first reason is that the event that happened in the book depository didn't happen by the timeline that they tell us. They tell us that Oswald was downstairs drinking this soda 90 seconds after the assassination. But in fact, that never happened. And what did actually happen is that Baker made an arrest in front of the book depository in the minutes after the assassination. He made an arrest of the shooter from the Daltex building, who I've identified as Emilio Santana. This Emilio Santana will go on to be held by Bill Decker for a number of weeks. You can find in some of the old newspaper articles that they arrested what they called the, quote, second suspect. in Dealey Plaza that no one ever talks about in any of the documentaries or anything. But he was held for 3 weeks, long after Jack Ruby shoots Oswald, and they were desperate to find reasons to hold him, but they couldn't. And eventually, I believe the feds stepped in and had him cut loose. And so that completely forced me to rewrite the timeline of events happening at the book depository. And so I realized that that event with Baker and Truly didn't happen inside the book depository on the second floor in the lunchroom. It happened on between either the third or fourth floor, and it happened no earlier than 12:37 or 12:38 p.m., which happens to coincide with a whole nother series of events inside the book depository. But then we have the contradictory information that Oswald allegedly got on a bus at between 12:36 and 12:40 p.m., several blocks away. That's contradicted by this interaction, if this interaction on the stairwell happened at 12:37 p.m., like I have concluded. So the entire story of Oswald having ever stepped foot at that book depository makes no sense whatsoever. They're not going to have an assassination team come into the building, kill the president from the 6th floor, yet simultaneously they're going to let their patsy, who was completely uninvolved in any of this, just wander about the building. Does that make any sense at all? Are these professionals going to bring in a professional team? They're going to get all the employees out of the building to the front to go watch the parade, right? They tell everybody go outside and watch the parade. So they empty the building out with only a handful of exceptions, right? Then they're going to funnel an assassination team up to the 6th floor. Simultaneously, they're going to allow Lee Oswald just to wander the building. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's so ridiculous. It's the one aspect of the assassination that no one has put 10 seconds into thinking through, okay? Your patsy is going to screw up the whole gig if he actually goes into the building and goes up to the 6th floor. He's going to be like, oh my God, there's assassins up here. What the hell is going on, right? And so it's totally BS. And then when you get the stories of Oswald leaving the book depository, you're talking about the stories of Pierce Allman, Terrence Ford, and Robert McNeil, who were reporters for NBC and the local Dallas station, right? So not only do these guys give an identical story about running into Oswald on the steps of the book depository as Oswald is leaving, when you go back and you actually read their initial statements from 1963, all three of these guys are like, who's Oswald? We don't know what you're talking about. We didn't run into anybody. We went in, used the phone, and left, and we don't know what you're talking about. So they changed their stories over the years, right? So really, there's no evidence that Oswald was ever there. The story with all the stories that day involving Oswald at the book depository, starting with Buell Frazier, continuing through the incident with Marion Baker in the lunchroom with a Coke, leading through all the other events that we know of, and Oswald leaving with Robert McNeil and this stuff. All these stories fall apart when you dig into the nitty-gritty of what happened. And you come to realize this is a carefully constructed fiction. Oswald was never there that day. By my calculations, he was in Fort Worth all morning until he caught a ride to the Texas Theater by a guy named Daryl Bo Click. Or actually, his real name is Travie Delano Bo Click. He's related to Bernice Click, who was an associate of Jack Ruby, and he happened to work for the Dallas Transit Company bus company. And I believe he gave a ride to Oswald to the Texas Theater. Oswald enters between 1 o'clock and 1:06, as per Butch Burroughs, who was one of the managers who was operating the candy case. Oswald did not walk in without buying a ticket. None of that stuff. That's all a fiction as well. Oswald bought a ticket, and he was seated downstairs. And then we have the cops rushing in and making 2 arrests that day. One of Oswald out the front, and another, quote, Oswald lookalike, as per Butch Burroughs, out the back of the theater. Which is confirmed by the next door neighbor, a guy named Bernard Hare, who ran Bernie's Hobby House. So we have numerous witness statements who can testify that numerous Oswalds were arrested out of the book depository that day. So, yeah, the story of the Kennedy assassination that you know of has been a really well thought out and planted fictional story. The real story is much more detailed, and it shines a light on the tradecraft engaged in by our intelligence agencies.
You mentioned you identified one of the shooters, Emilio Santana. You actually identified multiple. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I think I got pretty much all of them.
And one of them is a very interesting character to me, and a very well-known character at the time, Jack Valente. And you believe he was actually a shooter, right?
Yeah, so Jack Valente is here's the thing, like, you've got guys in the CIA who maintain this professional veneer, right? And so I believe Jack Valenti is one of those guys. When you get into Jack Valenti's history, there's a lot of contradiction. But ultimately, what you'll find is that he had started a advertising firm down in Houston called Weekly and Valenti. He ends up getting Kennedy's campaign. He manages Kennedy's campaign in 1960. He had handled Johnson's campaign since 56. And he had been working with companies like Continental Oil, Standard Oil, Humble Oil, and which Humble Oil was one of the first companies that he worked for when he was like 15, 16 years old. Spent 15 or 16 years there. And they kind of sponsored him to go to college and all this stuff. But what you find about Jack Valenti is that he lied about where he was during the assassination. Besides having been involved with various weird intelligence kind of operations before, you'll find that there's a document in his file that talks about having to transfer Jack Valenti's payroll from his employment at a federal agency over to the White House, right? But at this time, he's only supposed to have been an ad man down in Houston. That's it. He's an ad guy who handles some political campaigns. That's it. What federal agency could he possibly have been working for, running his own multi-million-dollar business? Only the CIA, right? And so this becomes, I think, pretty obvious when you dig into like his educational background. He ends up going to Harvard, becomes friends with Henry Kissinger back in 46, 47, right? So this is before the CIA is even a thing, right? But by the time he gets done in 48, the CIA is alive and kicking. He then goes and ends up starting he's working for Humble Oil, but then he starts his own ad business. But we have the document showing that they had to transfer his payroll from a federal agency over to the White House. And then when you get into like Jack Valenti's alibi for the day, what you have is him attempting to use the testimony of Kennedy's secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, a bunch of Johnson's secretaries. There's about 5 or 6 of the women secretaries who ended up being on the VIP bus. There's a 24th car in line, the final vehicle in the motorcade. They're allegedly on this. Well, they are definitely on this bus, but Jack Valenti tried to use them as an alibi. But clearly, he was lying, because when you dig into all their statements, they never mention him once. There's even a time when they get to Parkland Hospital and then they catch a ride with a state trooper to Parkland Hospital, and they explain in detail how they were squished in the car. There were 6 of them piled into this car, and Evelyn Lincoln names all the people in the car. Well, Jack Valenti attempted to use this story as his alibi, and failed miserably because they never mention him, and there's obviously no room for a 4th person in the front seats of this police car, right? And so then on top of that, you have this woman, Elizabeth Forsling Harris, who tries to come forward and back up Jack Valenti's story. And she claims to have been in this cop car also. So this adds another person. This adds a 5th person to the front seat of this cop car, right? So clearly they're lying about this stuff. They didn't think anybody was going to dig too deep into their story. But ultimately, Jack Valenti's alibis completely fall apart. And ultimately, he is the shooter on the grassy knoll who will be driven to Parkland Hospital by the Secret Service car who pick him up on the other side of the overpass. And so my book goes into excruciating detail on how they pulled that off, and the photographic record, involving a whole bunch of pictures that show the progress and the timeline of what happened with the Secret Service car, who were all complicit. Ultimately, the assassination was coordinated by Israel, their partnership with the CIA and the Mafia, and it involved other organizations like the Secret Service, but even guys like Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers. Kenny O'Donnell was one of Kennedy's best friends. He was one of his closest confidants and basically his right-hand man. But he was clearly involved in the assassination because he was in the Secret Service car, who then gave a ride to Jack Valenti to Parkland Hospital, right? And so clearly he knew about this forever, didn't say anything about it, and he ended up drinking himself to death in 1977. So
approximately how many shooters had you identified total?
Potentially 8 or 9, but there's a couple that didn't shoot. Robert Bernard Baker, big fat guy on top of the overpass. right-hand man of Jimmy Hoffa, Chicago outfit guy. He was definitely there. There's talk of a rifle, people seeing a rifle on the overpass, but clearly a shot never came from that direction. He would have shot down and forward, then that never happened. So we can say that there were shooters who didn't shoot. I put Danny Green up on the Cleveland mobster. I put him there up on the pergola. I can't really say if he shot or not. I have Sergei Arkacha on the roof of the book depository with a Mauser, but can I say if he pulled the trigger or not? I can't say, right? So I got 3 guys who I put in shooting positions, but I can't say that they actually pulled the trigger. But when you eliminate them, I have 6 who did, right? You have David Ferry and Jack Valenti on the knoll. You have Lawrence Howard, Lauren Hall, and in the book depository, right? And then you have Emilio Santana. So you got 1, 2, 3. I can say for certain 5 pulled a trigger. And Dave Yaris between the pergola and the fence. So that's 6. Dave Yaris missed. He fired his rifle, probably some sort of 303, or a 30-06, and that bullet ended up hitting the grass and was dug out of the grass and never seen again. So 6 shooters, 3 more potentially who I can't say whether they shot or not. And when you look at the pattern, it's a kind of a crescent moon shape from the overpass to the knoll to the pergola to the book depository. It's a big crescent, right? All the bullets are flying one direction, right? So they had to avoid a crossfire situation, and they did a good job at that. So when people say that there's shooters on a on the southern knoll, because it's kind of a second area people call the southern grassy knoll, or the county records building or any of that stuff, I just kind of eliminate any shooters having been there, because they would have been in direct crossfire situations with the other shooters and potentially people who were there as witnesses, right? Because we know a lot of the witnesses were there, knew what was going to happen, and the shooters knew that there were going to be people there to watch, and they couldn't risk them getting hurt.
Well, maybe I've got my tinfoil hat on too tightly, but I look at the Zapruder film, and it seems like it's shot very calmly and extremely well for the situation, and it just brings up red flags. Was this individual involved? And there's speculation that it was highly edited as well. What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. So you have this goes back to a conspiracy surrounding the Daltex building, right? So the Daltex building, there's some contradiction or some confliction as to who the actual owners of the building were. I've seen 3 different lists of who the actual owners were. I've seen lists including Morris Jaffe, Sam Bloom, and including Abraham Zapruder. So we don't know how close Abraham Zapruder was to these other guys, because I can tell you Sam Bloom was definitely involved. Morton Jaffe, definitely best friend of Lyndon Johnson. I don't know, because I don't think Lyndon Johnson was involved in the shooting. So, but when you have guys who are actively doing things, you have like Sam Bloom, who was one of the owners of the Daltex building, and he was also a member of the Dallas Citizens Council, which is the organization that kind of dictated where Kennedy would stop when he was in Dallas, right? Would he go to this building or that building? What organizations would he meet with? And also on that board of the Dallas Citizens Council was Jack Valenti, right? So we have a clear-cut connection from one of the owners of the Daltex to Jack Valenti directly, right? But ultimately, at the Daltex building, you have Abraham Zapruder, and whether or not he was involved in the conspiracy or not really comes back to whether or not he, how close was he to the Dallas Citizens Council? How close was he to Sam Bloom? I don't have anything definitive, but it is kind of fishy. Well, here's another thing that's fishy. For many decades, they said that was the only film of the assassination, but it's not even close to being the only film. There's like at least a half a dozen other films that at least show part of the assassination or show the aftermath, right? The Nix film, the Robert Hughes film, the Montesana film, the DCA film. All of these are films that have relevant stuff going on, mostly after the assassination occurred. But for many decades, we were told that the Zapruder film was the only film, right? But that was clearly not the case.
Now, I know you're going to be adding some chapters for an update of the book. Any information that you can talk about that you'll be including?
Yes, I've already started writing, actually. So we're going to update the book to a 2nd edition, and I'm going to add 4 chapters to it. And that, I'm just kind of, I'm not sure when we're going to do that. It'll be in the first quarter of next year for sure. Like, January, February, March, in that range. There's a lot, we have a lot going on, and we're juggling a lot of things. And so I'm just trying to, that will definitely be out. But also, I've already outlined a second entirely different book. Basically a warning from history too.
Oh, wow.
And so that's going to go into all the detailed background government stuff behind the assassination.
Oh, right on.
And so we'll have a whole nother book. That one will probably take me a whole 12 months to write.
Well, we got some other exciting announcements that I want to get to. First, you have a new Substack, Bloody History. Tell us about what the audience can expect from there and how they can get that.
Sure. If you go to bloodyhistory.substack.com, that's my Substack. And basically it's an examination of World War II, all the events leading to World War II, the aftermath. And we do some Kennedy, but not much Kennedy there at all. We're covering a lot of texts, a lot of books, a lot of OSS. And I've brought back Understanding Propaganda, and we're doing Understanding Propaganda as part of my Substack now. So if you were enjoying Understanding Propaganda before, we just did 4 parts on some World War II documents from the OSS, which is really good stuff. So yeah, definitely tune into that. We've got up to about 70 people who have subscribed, which is really good.
Excellent.
So,
all right. Well, you've got an exciting project that you are about to roll out, and all you crypto guys out there, listen up. Tell us about Independent Media Token.
Sure. Well, you let the cat out of the bag. I was going to spring that on them, but here's the thing. So crypto projects have kind of gone to shit, if you ask me. We started out I'm going to take 5 minutes and explain the history of crypto in a nutshell. So basically, Bitcoin comes out. It's the first cryptocurrency. It's really the only one that matters. And fundamentally, it solved so many monetary problems. The problem of governance, basically. You don't have people who can print money with Bitcoin anymore. And then after Bitcoin, you had a bunch of people come out and they tried to compete with Bitcoin, which is an absolute failure, right? So people came out with, basically they copied the code, but they made a little tweak here or there. And so they came out with different things. Then you had Ethereum come out, and Ethereum gave people the ability to create their own token without having to create their own decentralized infrastructure. So it opened the gateway to a lot of scams. But I mean, there are a lot of projects that are good on Ethereum that the token functions as some sort of functionality within their own ecosystem, right? So there are some actually decent applications of these, but not in as far as like, you have to associate like Bitcoin with money, cash dollars, money, and all the other cryptos with kind of something else, right? With more of like a stock, more of some sort of representative value, but not really a money, right? So that's kind of the difference there. And then you had Solana come out, which basically did what Ethereum is doing, but it rewrote the entire blockchain infrastructure. And Solana is really, it was created by former employees of Oracle who are like, they're data scientists. They're not just a bunch of nerds in their garage. They're actual real people who have created large scale infrastructure. So when you look at how Solana works, it's absolutely amazing how it functions. Now, it could never replace Bitcoin or anything like that, or even Ethereum. But basically with Solana, it can process multiple blockchains at the same time, right? Instead of having one block at a time that you construct a chain with, it can process numerous blocks and construct numerous chains, all part of the same infrastructure, all acting interoperably. So really, it's an amazing thing that they did. But there wasn't really any kind of infrastructure there for us to be able to raise money. And we were looking to create kind of a venture capital fund, a VC that would go into funding independent media projects, right? And I was kind of inspired to some degree by Ryan Christian at Last American Vagabond, who was one of our media partners. He was having some trouble with the IRS. He was having some trouble with a lawsuit, a frivolous lawsuit. So he was experiencing some serious lawfare, and that's expensive. And he was trying to raise money, and that's a hard thing to do. So that was one inspiration for this project, to find a way for people to invest in crypto and at the exact same time help raise money for various projects. Well, getting back to Solana, when you look at Solana and how Solana works, they made the infrastructure so good and so cheap that it opened the door to like this world of meme coins, right? So everyone, and these meme coins are garbage. They're crap. They don't do anything. They are pump and dump, get rich quick schemes, and they have no functionality. And looking at how good Solana is as a blockchain, I was like, Jesus Christ, what a waste. Well, we discovered that they actually had come up with an extension to their protocol called the SPL 2022 program. And basically what that did was it allowed you to implement a number of various behaviors of the token after the fact. And so we actually created a token that every transfer generates a 1% tax that will be sent to us. With that 1% tax combined with 100 million tokens that we're allotting to this fund, we're creating what we're calling the Creator Fund. And that Creator Fund is going to go to fund independent media projects. And that where that money goes will be decided by you, ladies and gentlemen, the audience. So if you go to Imt.network, that's our website, Imt.network, independent media token, right? Imt.network. You can go down to the bottom and contact us. And if you're interested in being a media partner, you can fill out the form, and we're looking to have as many media partners as possible. Right now, we have an impressive list of media partners. We are currently working with Macroaggressions, Forbidden Knowledge News, Last American Vagabond, AM Wake Up, Cory Hughes Bloody History, Day Zero, Rogue Ways, What is Truth with Wheezy, Legit Bat, obviously BG Cast and Lindsay Sharman. Plus we have the Rained Out Rant Cast, Chris over there, After Dark with Don Rogers, Raised by Giants, and Rebunked with Scott Armstrong. But we're looking for basically 100 media partners. So if you have a show and you're interested in getting on board with us and being part of our initial distributions of tokens, which will occur sometime probably June of next year, we're going to have this thing, will be out by probably January, and we're going to let this thing kind of roll around for a couple months to generate some income from this tax that we can distribute. But we plan on having this thing out there ready to go. Like I said, launched on exchanges in January-ish, and we'll be distributing funds to independent content creators by the summer.
Right on. And what was that website one more time?
It's Imt.network, like independent media token, Imt, India Mike Tango, right? Imt.network.
Now, you also have a Telegram group. Are you putting any information about this in the group?
Not yet. We are waiting to launch the Telegram group for the launch on exchanges, because it's going to be very overwhelming for us to get things ready and manage the Telegram prior to the launch. But Jim is our guy, and he's going to be managing that for us. And so, yeah, we're not really planning on doing any of that stuff until we're closer to actual launch on the exchanges.
Yeah, we've got lots of stuff going on. After I finish Doors of Perception, we are also planning on a JFK documentary. That's down the pipeline. Hopefully, maybe by early next year, we'll get that going. But lots of stuff to look forward to. Cory, anything else you got working on or that you'd like to mention before we close out?
Well, just in regards to the independent media token, if you're interested in the concept, if you want to learn more about it or want to learn how you're going to be able to acquire any of these, you can feel free to email me directly or go to the website and just fill out the little card, and I'll get back to you within a day or two. But we're currently doing a private pre-sale to raise money for our liquidity pool, and we need to raise about $10,000, and we figure we'll have that done by December-ish.
Yes.
So
yes, check that out. This is exciting for everybody in the independent media space. I'm super stoked about it. Cory, thank you again. Great information as always. One more time before we go, let them know where the website and everything else is. Yeah,
you can catch me at coryhughes.org or bloodyhistory.substack.com, or my podcast is Cory Hughes Bloody History, available podcast platforms everywhere.
Perfect. Thank you, Cory. We'll do it again soon. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See you then. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history. Hello friends, have you tried what may be the most powerful antioxidant known to man? C60 PurplePower. My C60 story has led me to great health mentally and physically. It's helped me personally lose weight, have more energy, and fight aging in general. You can also get C60 for your pets. Our dogs love it. They may live forever. Go check out C60 for yourself. If you use the link right in the description, you're going to get 10% off your order plus free shipping. They have some incredible new products like gummies, oils, and much more. Hello, friends. If you or a loved one is struggling with a digestive problem, if you often feel bloated or gassy, experience constipation or loose stools more often than you'd like, maybe you get heartburn and discomfort or pain after meals. If any of these gastrointestinal issues are reducing the quality of your life, get in touch with my friend Christian Yordanov. He's a functional health practitioner and author of 2 health books. He has successfully helped clients with truly severe gut problems. Now we're talking about people who dreaded the thought of their next meal because of all the gas, bloating, distension, and pain they would experience. Many of his clients have had severe gut problems for multiple years, sometimes more than a decade, having received no assistance from the conventional system. Christian uses state-of-the-art lab tests to zero in on your specific imbalances. He designs customized gut restoration and health optimization protocols for each of his clients. He works with clients all around the world and assists them every step of the way with chat support and regular video sessions. He'll help you dial in your diet, cleanse your gut, optimize your meat suit, and show you exactly what you need to do to restore your health and digestive function. So if you're tired of suffering needlessly and want to resolve your gut problems once and for all, click that link in the description to visit Christian's website, book a free intro call with him to discuss your situation, and make sure to mention FKN at the time of booking. He's going to add extra consultation sessions to your package. So book that call and fix your gut. You can now stream the forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana free on Tubi TV, which is available on Fire Stick, Roku, iOS, and Android. Louisiana is a magical place.
And that was Cajun country, you know?
The food's good. The ladies is fine.
Just let them roll like the old folks say, c'est la vie.
So much incredible occult and forgotten history.
There's a lot to the ancient history there that we could be uncovering. Everybody is starting to really put pieces together.
I've been writing books and doing research in the field of Native American mounds and archaeology since the 1980s. The LSU campus mounds were redated, which is absolutely bizarre. This is all very, very strange, and it's just been made more strange because all these old mounds are in Louisiana. The Smithsonian dug into over 2,000 mounds, finding 17 large skeletons.
They saw a very tall humanoid being.
We just have a rich history of paranormal type stuff. New Orleans is considered to be the most haunted city in the country.
The energy that's over the land, and that energy seems to be stuck there.
In 2019, I had an experience. It was all black had long black hair on it, a tall creature that had a dog's head. Legendary things of fiction become reality.
When he was 15, this dog man chased him through the woods. He only survived because of his dog saving his life.
Y'all may kill me today. I said, but I promise you this, I'm going to kill at least 2 or 3 young. I said, you will for the pain of this 30-06.
It was so close that he could see down the back of its throat.
The vast swamps of Louisiana hold many secrets. From an incredibly old, forgotten history to mythical creatures.
There are no answers. There's only more questions.